Welcome to Novara Live. It's Monday afternoon. I'm Michael Walker and I'm joined by Turn Left's Curtis Daly. Great to have you back, Curtis.
Yeah, very happy to be back. I hope you're doing okay, Michael.
I'm doing fine, actually. We have some, shocking stories coming up. The bizarre handling of one of the country's most high-profile sex offenders and their accidental release. He wasn't even trying to escape. Really, I think, shows quite how far the British state has fallen. Also, we'll talk about Javier Milei's huge win in the Argentine midterm elections. Very interesting political phenomenon over there. The Reform MP, who, if you were a Reform MP this weekend, there were a lot of legitimate things you could be annoyed about, like the sex offender being released by accident from prison when he wasn't even trying to escape. But this Reform MP, as you might have seen, has decided that what's really got her going is seeing Black and Asian people in adverts on TV and on billboards. We'll discuss that. And then finally, British commentator and Israel critic Sami Hamdi has been arrested by ICE while on a US-speaking tour. Do stay tuned for all of that. As ever, if you'd like to support our work, you can sign up at novaramedia.com/support and make sure to let us know your comments in the YouTube chat. If you had any doubt that Britain isn't working, this weekend should have confirmed it. Now, on Friday, we got the news that one of the country's most high-profile sex offenders, who had crossed the channel on a small boat and whose crime sparked a riot, had been released back into the public by accident only a month after being sentenced to jail. Now, this was all news that we discussed very briefly on Friday because it had just broken, and that was bad enough. Then on Saturday, to add insult to injury, we discovered the man in question wasn't even trying to escape. Sky News spoke to another gentleman who was delivering a fridge freezer to Chelmsford Prison when Hadush Kabatu was accidentally released.
So I'd parked outside, popped in, showed him my ID, showed him who I was at the point of where the guy was released. So I went in, gave him my ID, the guy was released. He walked out of the airlock. He then kept returning back to the airlock and basically saying to the officers there, where am I going? What am I doing? I don't know where I'm going, what I'm doing. He was holding a pack of paperwork in his arm, literally like that, holding his bag of bits. You could see inside his clear bag, had brown bits where it said evidence and stuff like that on it.
So he didn't know what was happening?
No, he knew he'd been deported. So he'd come over to me and said, I need you to help me, I need you to help me. His English was pretty good, to be honest with you. But basically asking me to help, and I said, I'm sorry, what can I do? I don't know where to go, I don't know where to go. And I said, I don't know. I said, I'm just making a delivery here. And he said, I've been deported. So he kept going back and forth. Anyway, he walked into the reception of the actual prison and was saying to the officers there as well, where do I go? What do I do? And he was presenting the paperwork he had, and they were saying that you've got to go to a set place. Exactly what for, I'm not sure. It was something to do with the deportation, and I say I don't know the whole process of it. But there was no address. There was no set address to say, right, this is where you're going and this is how you get there. So he kept saying, well, where do I go? What do I do? I don't know. And then he'd come, they basically was almost sending him away. It's like, go, you've been released, you go.
So they're literally forcing him to escape. He's sort of like, what am I supposed to do? And they're like, just go, stop coming back to us and asking us questions about what's supposed to happen. Just leave, please. When you hear that someone's escaped from prison, you think, oh, maybe there was a plan behind that. Maybe there was, there was some trickery, there was some fraud, or there was, a very dramatic escape where someone had to climb through a very high window and then over a big wall. This was a guy who was literally being told, please get out of this prison. And apparently, this is even more bizarre. It went on for a really long time because the delivery man you just heard from said that after he went into the prison to complete the delivery that he was there to do, that Kabatu was still there on his way out.
So it wasn't a case of he's released and he's disappeared and run off. He was standing around the prison trying to work out where he needed to go for maybe an hour and a half, maybe a little bit longer, before I overheard one of the officers saying, right, this is how you get to the station. You know, you go down here, la-di-da.
So somebody at the prison directed him to the station?
Yes, yeah. And they told him he had to get on a train.
So he really didn't want to escape. He was there for 90 minutes. That's longer than watching a whole feature film. But he was there saying, what am I supposed to do? And they say, just go to the station, get on a train, go anywhere but here. So, as you know, after basically forcing Hadesh Kabatu to flee justice, this was a man on the run, and a high-profile manhunt began. Except at this point, it was very unclear whether Kabatu actually knew anyone was looking for him. So after making his way from the prison to Chelmsford town centre, he was filmed asking members of the public for help, still wearing his full prison gear, presumably somewhat confused. He then made it to Hackney. I don't know where he got the money for the ticket. Maybe that's what someone helped him with there. Obviously Hackney in East London, where he was caught on CCTV casually walking up the stairs in Dalston Library. The police then released this image and encouraged the public to look out for a man carrying a bag decorated with avocados. According to the Sun newspaper, Kabatu was later spotted asking for a free night's stay at a Premier Inn in Dalston. Remember, this is a guy who had only been in the country for 2 weeks when he was arrested. So it's unclear if he would have known anyone to help him out. He's probably quite confused. And the farce continued until Sunday morning when he was arrested in Finsbury Park. So a passerby filmed the arrest, which took place at around 8:30 a.m. after someone spotted him and called the police. Now, this is a quote from a local dog walker. So they said, I knew that he'd last been seen in the Hackney area, and I thought, oh, that looks awfully like that guy. He's not wearing the same clothes, but it looks like him. He wasn't struggling. He was walking quite calmly, a bit dejectedly. He was staring down. He had his hood up, but it was a calm situation. It was a leisurely stroll out of the park with him, with his hands cuffed, but he wasn't trying to get away. He might feel like he's been arrested. Finally, someone is going to tell me where to go. Because it is also the case that people had been reporting that he wanted to be deported. Now, obviously, he wanted to get to Britain. That's why he presumably paid someone to put him in a boat over the channel. But presumably after he'd, been caught sexually for sex offences and then been put in jail, and then maybe he was somewhat aware of the fact that his crime had caused national riots. He was like, actually, I do want to get out of here now. This is too much. So he wanted to be deported, but no one wants to deport. Everyone just tells him he's been deported, or that he's got to, present to be deported, but doesn't know where. Wandering around Hackney and Finsbury Park for a weekend, and then finally at 8 a.m., someone tells the police that this guy who apparently there's this huge manhunt, but doesn't seem to know that anyone's looking for him. The police come and arrest him, and he's a bit dejected, but also maybe a little bit relieved. I don't know. Wes Streeting broke the news of Kabatu's arrest after the heroic action of our police force in Finsbury Park on Sunday morning, speaking to the BBC.
This morning, we finally managed to track him down. He's been arrested, and I want to say an enormous thank you to the public whose vigilance enabled this arrest this morning. He's been detained and will be deported. What we will also do is ascertain how on earth it was that he was ever released into the public in the first place when he should have been deported. The Justice Secretary has ordered an investigation that will take place. There will be accountability, and we will be open and honest with the public about what went wrong, who is being held to account, and what we plan to do about it to stop this happening again.
So what did go wrong with the accidental release of Hadesh Kabatu? Well, the chief of Her Majesty's Prison Inspectorate says these types of things are hardly unusual.
Prisons are just so busy, particularly big inner city Victorian jails like Chelmsford. The number of prisoners just coming in and out every day is incredibly high. Prisoners going to court, prisoners being shipped to other jails, prisoners being released. But on top of that, we've seen so many different early release schemes. We had the 30-day scheme, we had the 40-day scheme, we had the 70-day scheme under the Conservative government. And then since then, this government has reduced or increased the remission time from 50% to down to 40%. So lots of changes. We've also seen changes to recall to custody. And on top of that, I think what we've got are very busy people, often quite inexperienced, with huge caseloads. And as a result of this, we're seeing many of these releases in error. And it is worth saying that at Pentonville recently, we also saw many releases in error the other way, which was prisoners being kept beyond the end of their sentence because, again, the sentence hadn't been calculated properly.
Now, that bit at the end really struck me because, obviously you think, how can someone get released by accident? But then you've also got the opposite, which is there are loads of people sitting in prison who are supposed to be released. So they're saying, I'm supposed to be released now. And then the prison guard's saying, no, you're not. No, you're not. They're like, well, the guy next to me, who I know committed a sex offense and was convicted just 2 weeks ago, he's just walked out with an avocado bag. And I'm here and I was supposed to be released weeks ago. I want to go see my wife and kids. I mean, working in prisons, I did an interview about this a while ago, but people who work in prisons have a really, really difficult job. It's really dangerous. It's not particularly well paid. And I mean, we're going to talk about this in a bit more detail in a moment, but because of austerity, lots of the most experienced people have left. There's extremely high turnover. Like, I already knew it was miserable and dangerous to be there because also the fact that you've got these, I mean, this is slightly separate to the Bartu issue, isn't it? But because you've got underfunding and you've got inexperienced people, that means you have to lock people in their cells for more of the time throughout the day because you need actually expertise and people to manage that. So the whole thing seems like a terribly miserable situation, but I hadn't realized that you would also have prisoners saying, I'm supposed to be released and I haven't been released yet, and other prisoners who you're releasing who don't even want to be released. But that seems to be the situation. Notably, Kabatu isn't even the first person in recent years to have been released from this particular prison, so Chelmsford Prison. In 2023, the prison was duped into freeing Junaid Ahmed, aged 36, after a fake email from the Royal Courts of Justice said he should be released on bail. Can you guess what the prisoner was in jail for? He was on bail for fraud. So they should have guessed, really. And this bit is good. I like this. The authorities realised their mistake only after becoming suspicious when they received similar emails urging the release of 2 more prisoners, Adam Mohammed and Charlie Whittaker. So you've got whoever the friend of these, well, this guy was on bail, so maybe he was convicted ultimately, but these suspected criminals who's just sort of saying, oh, we think that our friend should be released, signed the Royal Courts of Justice. They're probably shocked that he's been released. And then the next day they're like, oh, also actually from the Royal Courts of Justice, can you release Adam and Charlie? And then by that point they're like, this seems a bit suspicious. Why is this email from hotmail.com? I don't know, Royal Courts of Justice 1 at hotmail.com. It all makes you wonder whether the Tories cutting the Justice Department's budget by 1/4 was actually such a good idea. This chart from the IFS shows how budgets for the Ministry of Justice have changed since 2002. So as you can see, they went up under Labour until the financial crisis. Then under the Tories, they fell to 30% below their 2002 levels or 40% below their peaks. They then recovered. They still haven't quite recovered. Although the key here is even if we do bring that funding back to the level it was, which, by the way, I don't think Labour are planning to, not back to 2010 levels anyway, you've already lost all the expertise because what you do when you do cuts to a public service is you offer voluntary redundancy. Well, first of all, when the cuts sort of start to be implemented, it gets a bit more miserable to work in the workplace because you're not hiring new people and so you can't do your job properly. Then you offer voluntary redundancies. That means that all the experienced people take the voluntary redundancy because they don't like doing this miserable job anymore. And then you just get into this doom spiral where even if you then give it new money, everyone you're employing is new. The expertise is gone. Basically, it's a big mess that you don't want to get into, but we've got into it. Curtis, this is a serious issue, but it's difficult not to find the farcical nature of this accidental prison break, this reluctant prison break, let's be real, slightly, I don't know, painfully amusing.
Yeah, I mean, look, it would be really, really fun if it wasn't so serious. But my God, this is like a plot of a Monty Python film. I mean, the man wants to be deported and no one wants to deport him. It's absolutely farcical. I mean, we've got so many layers to this. But look, first of all, this is a man walking around in prison clothes, right? He's on CCTV. And yet, by the way, I find it very funny that people want a surveillance state and they think it's somehow makes us safer. Well, I'm sorry, but this guy has been walking around calmly, been on multiple videotapes. And are we any safer? No, we're not. Look, public trust is pretty much at an all-time low. And this is going to have a very, very big political fallout from this. I dare to imagine. I mean, obviously the right wing are going to jump on this anyway, right? But we are in a low trust society, but that's a very deep-seated reason as to why we have that. First of all, we've had the decimation of the public realm. It's not the first time I said that. It won't be the last time I said that. 45 years of neoliberalism where basically the entire public have been destroyed, society has been destroyed, and that is through, obviously, of course, underfunding and austerity. So you've got a low trust society anyway, compounded with a media that also doesn't really reflect the real issues of the British people, and outright pushes conspiracy theories as well. I mean, look, there's now a lot of people, and by the way, none of us can know for certain, but there's going to be a lot of people saying, well, this was obviously done on purpose. You're going to hear right-wing conspiracies saying, oh, this is Keir Starmer wanting to do this now to push his left-wing agenda. I know, crazy stuff. But it's really, really important to understand that the economics behind this issue is really salient. Now, I think potentially we might be able to convince the right wing even more on this particular thing, because austerity, I mean, when you say public cuts and austerity creates more child poverty, some people go, well, that's just the market. When you say public cuts create more violent sex criminals being released in society, maybe they listen. I mean, your chart showed there that nearly a quarter of the funding was cut. We had I think we had a probation budget cut by 12% in 1 year. Some of the stats I'm looking at is really wild to me. In 2025, there was a 128% increase in accidental prisoners being released on error. Right, 130% increase on the year before. This is wild to me. Nothing works in this country. Our public services have been completely shot. And another layer to this is the fact that our political class are creating social problems, right? If you look at the public realm and you look at neoliberalism, you can see that crime is up in certain instances, not violent crime, that's actually down. When it comes to theft, for example, petty theft, that's gone up. And we're seeing more social discohesion. We're seeing more social problems. And that basically gives the right wing a nice little silver platter, because they can say, look at all these social problems. And their explanation is, well, of course, it's due to high amounts of immigration or too high immigration in a short period of time. It's to do with culture, all these things. And even though we would disagree with that, you're basically giving them a narrative on the plate, because at least they're coming up with an explanation. The political class will say, we can absolutely cut public services. I mean, Rachel Reeves said, I think in May, that she wanted to cut day-to-day spending and save £6 billion by 2030, right? The political class can do that. And then when you see these massive social crises happen, the right wing have their narrative. It's absolutely insane. I mean, I want to go for neoliberalism, and I know people are going to think, oh, you're bringing up neoliberalism again, but I just don't see how you can't look at the deep-rooted issues from this. But yeah, I mean, I think it's really, because again, my worry is the political fallout from this, because, and actually, you make a really good point. I just want to jump on that. You make a really good point about how, even though we can put in funding into these public services, right, we have to train up these doctors. In fact, the probation services themselves said that our services are inadequate. A lot of staff are not well prepared or trained. They're saying this themselves, and the government isn't listening. And even if we put more funding into probation services, right, it's going to be 10, 20 years sort of political project to get people back into the skills, or the high quality skills we need to protect our society.
Reform MP Sarah Pochin is absolutely fuming. Can you guess why?
Drives me mad when I see adverts full of black people, full of Asian people, full of, people that basically are anything.
What's wrong with that, Sarah?
White.
What's
People who are anything but white. Like, of all the things to get fuming about, when I see adverts with black people, Asian people, anyone but white people, I'm furious. And we should be fair to Sarah. I mean, she doesn't deserve this, but and it doesn't excuse what she said. But there was a context here. As I say, the context doesn't excuse it, but will show you why she ended up saying that completely racist thing. This was the discussion that led up to that.
A bit left field, this one, but I think it's creepingly important. Would Reform do anything to look at the representation of the demographics of TV and public advertising? Because we're getting to the point now where adverts don't represent what this country looks like, and actually positive demonisation of white people, just portrayed as criminals or inadequate when they're not portrayed anywhere else. Now, the reason why this is important, we got a case of art imitates life. because we're getting to the point where a number of my friends think that we're being discriminated like in employment markets because white men are seen as useless and whatever and just invisible. And there's one financial institution which coincidentally uses a strikingly similar image of Nigel in their advertising for an incompetent, useless, arrogant white male. I just wondered if that's something we thought would look into.
Okay, Stuart, stay where you are. Sarah, what do you think of what Stuart's saying? What would Reform UK do about it, if anything?
I think Stuart's absolutely right. Drives me mad when I see adverts full of black people, full of Asian people, full of, people that basically are anything.
What's wrong with that, Sarah? What's wrong with that?
Well, it doesn't reflect our society, and I feel that your average white person, average white family is like I agree with you, Stuart, not represented anymore in TV.
There are lots of white people on television, Sarah, or they're not. There are lots of white people. There are lots of white men. There are lots of white women.
We're talking about adverts, and how many times do you look at a TV advert and you think there's not a single white person on it? And actually it is. It's something that's happened because, I believe, of the woke liberati that goes on inside, this sort of like in the arty-farty world. When it comes to, northern towns like Runcorn that I represent, it's just not representative of the rest of the country. Might be fine inside the M25, but it's definitely not representative of the rest of the country. And actually, you know what, I'm hearing this more and more. People notice and people will switch off.
She's referring to some research which Channel 4 did on representation. I mean, I don't know. I don't know what she's referring to actually, but this is being discussed. There have been a few articles printed about it in the Daily Mail and the like, because Channel 4 did some research which found that compared to the demographics of the population, black people and other ethnic minorities, but especially black people, are overrepresented because they're only 4% of the population. And apparently, according to this, they feature in half of commercials. Now, the thing that she said, which is completely untrue, well, the thing that's completely unreasonable is that this makes her furious, that she gets very angry when she sees a black or an Asian person in an advert. That's, ridiculous and presumably comes from some form of racism. The bit that she said, which is completely untrue, is that there are loads of adverts without white people. Because what's happening here is that adverts are always very mixed. Now, apparently, actually, one group who's very underrepresented is disabled people. But when it comes to race, adverts will often have mixed race couples. There'll always be a scenario where there's a group of friends, or one of them is white, one of them is a man, one of them is maybe gay. It's because as an advertiser, what you want to do is appeal to the maximum number of people possible. So if you show that you're inclusive to white people and black people and Asian people, or people say, oh, this is for everyone, the only people you're going to really turn off are people who are really racist. And you have to be really racist to get turned off by an advert because it has a mixed race couple in it, for example. So there's a much more mundane explanation for this than what Sarah Pochin is suggesting. This is sort of a business strategy where you say you want to appeal to as many people as possible. So you do have an unusually large number of sort of mixed race couples or mixed race families in advertising. The comments that she made, though, especially how angry it makes her to see black and brown people in adverts, has angered an awful lot of people. Whether they all hail from the woke liberati is an open question. Health Secretary Wes Streeting certainly seemed upset about it while speaking to the BBC's Laura Kuenssberg.
I think what she said was a disgrace. I think it was racist, and the deafening silence from her party leader says it all. Reform is a party who think that our flag only belongs to some of us who look like me, not all of us who have built this country, built its success. And let's not forget, when we remember the service and the sacrifice with this poppy, that the people who bled and died for our democracy and our freedom weren't just my grandfather and my great-grandfather who looked like me and worshipped the same God as me. It was people from right across what was then the empire, now the Commonwealth. People who are Muslim, people who are Sikh, people who are Hindu, people who look differently than you and I do. And we should remember that, defend it, and fight for what this country stands for. Okay. A decent, respectful and inclusive democracy, the most successful multi-faith democracy in the world. Yeah. Okay. We stand for that, Reform don't, and that's why they're not fit to govern.
That was Wes Streeting continuing his leadership campaign. Justice Secretary David Lammy has also weighed in, calling for Pochin to be sacked.
These were terribly racist remarks. Nigel Farage should sack her effectively and certainly say something and apologise for what she has said today. I'm disgusted by what she said, not just on behalf of myself or my family or the people of London, but on behalf of our country.
Since then, Farage has commented on Pochin's remarks.
The remarks were ugly, clumsy, put in a way that if you take them literally as they are on their own, you can put the worst of all interpretations on it. I understand the context in which she said it. I don't like the way in which she did it. I am very unhappy with her indeed. But if I felt the intention was deliberately and genuinely racist, I would have taken a different course of action.
So Farage says that we shouldn't take the comments literally. And of course, being Nigel Farage, he would not tolerate it if this was genuine racism. However, this is by no means an isolated incident for the party. So last year, its campaigners were caught telling people the party would be kicking all the Muslims out of the mosques and turning them into Wetherspoons. And a few months ago, they hired an ex-Tory MP who had had the whip withdrawn for using the N-word. Anne-Marie Morris is now in charge of Reform's social care policy. And there's Laura Ann Jones, another ex-Tory and Reform's only politician in the Welsh Parliament, who used an anti-Chinese slur in a WhatsApp chat. I won't read you the slur, but you can see here we kicked up a stink about TikTok to group, so, and then some laughing, and then no, and then the derogatory word for Chinese people, spies for me. Farage is yet to say if we're supposed to take that literally or not. But he has defended someone for using the same slur in the past. So this was back in 2014 when he said a UKIP candidate who had been forced to resign for using racist language had been a victim of snobbery. And again, that was the same derogatory word for Chinese people. Curtis, what do you make of this? I mean, there are lots of right-wing people getting annoyed about this analysis about representation in adverts. It is rather odd to get so annoyed about seeing black and brown people on billboards or in between programs on television.
Well, if I'm going to be honest, right, I think if you speak to a lot of people, they may actually agree with her. I think, and by the way, this is not my defense of her. Obviously, what she said is unfathomably racist. I mean, she quite literally said, I'm getting really, really mad because I'm seeing black and brown and Asian faces. It's wild to me. And there's, of course, a lot of right-wing people saying she should never apologise because, of course, the Overton window has moved to the right. So I actually think this is a deliberate strategy from Reform. What they're doing is say something quite outlandish, something that maybe they can't get away with saying without apologising. Nigel Farage will come in and very cleverly say, I'm very cross with her, but he doesn't attack the argument. He just says the way she said it was bad, right? But that puts that sort of idea on the agenda. She'll apologise for it. And then she did actually say, look, I'm sorry for the way the point I tried to make, but the point still stands. And then she went on to say, we have issues with DEI in this country. Insane that, obviously Reform are once again trying to import sort of American political lines and political narratives. Sorry, no one knows what DEI means really. And it sort of moves the agenda. So I think that is a definite sort of deliberate political strategy. What I find quite interesting, though, is that the right have basically done the inverse of liberal identity politics. So if you think maybe between 2010, 2015, 2016, the sort of political correctness was probably at its strongest, we should say, liberal identity politics was actually kind of successful. All political parties, whether they meant it or not, whether they believed it through policy, there was, quote unquote, say the right things, right? David Cameron sort of hug a hood. Always that line always sticks in my head because I know he didn't really care about these things, but it was about the political correctness, right? And it was successful, but short-lived because, as you could see, the political debate has really, really changed from political correctness to what we have today, saying there's too many black and brown people on TV. So, what do I mean when I say if you were to speak to an average person, they might get it? It's because I've heard it so much, but usually it doesn't incite the kind of anger that Sarah Pochin was displaying on TalkTV. I've heard comments here and there saying, it does seem that there's quite a lot of people of colour on there. I mean, it's not reflective in reality. And that's kind of it. People sort of, go about their day. I mean, look, speaking as a brown person of colour, my reaction is sometimes I'll watch an example. You've got a classroom. It's basically one white kid there. And I might think it's a little bit cringe because it's like, that's not really reality. It is sort of diversity, slightly overblown, and that's about it. Or my other thought would be probably they're trying to represent an area that has a higher minority demographic, and that's it, right? But I don't get offended. And likewise, if I see, which is the reality, like 90% of people on TV are white, I also don't get offended too. So what is the point here? Well, obviously, 4%, apparently 4% of the country are people of color, black, right? And yes, there is an overrepresentation in the media. But basically, this is kind of a similar thing with Target, and you touched upon that, which is in America, Target had the sort of woke capitalism thing. And people on the right thought it was a sort of an infusion of pushing culture, politics on the people, when really it was just free market capitalism. The point is businesses want to make as much money as possible. They see a market for it, and that is it. Target don't care about their queer employees. They don't care about trans people. They just, fly the flag to look inclusive to make money. And you're absolutely right. It's the same when it comes to TV, right? They're just looking at the cultural and ethnic makeup of the country, and they just want to be seen as representative, not because they're like big racial campaigners. It's simply because of, representing their market share, and also, sort of a liberal identity politics thing. And I think that I actually heard something really interesting from one of your colleagues, Aaron Bastani. I think he was saying how he spoke to Ash Sarkar before she released the Minority Rule book. And it really stuck with me. And he said, I think the real big failure of liberal identity politics is you're going to see a sort of real strong consciousness of white politics or white reactionaries. And that's kind of what's happened. It's why I like to call right-wingers like soy woke and snowflakes, because they've basically just taken liberal identity politics, the thing that they say they hate the most, and just made it on their terms. And the big problem with both of them is, one, obviously, the right wing, it's very, very racist. But the problem with those of us on the left had a lot of issues with sort of liberal identity politics is there's no class analysis there. You would see sort of well-meaning people want to see representation in positions of power. You want to see people of color, different gender, like I said, representation, right? But it doesn't matter what the views are. It doesn't matter if their views are very much of the political establishment. That doesn't matter as long as it looks okay. I mean, I remember seeing a clip, I think it was this morning, don't quote me on that. And it was a brown journalist speaking to Rishi Sunak, and someone tweeted saying, regardless of their political views, right? Isn't it fantastic that you're seeing a brown journalist interviewing a brown prime minister? And me, again, as a brown guy, I was thinking, no, this is a Tory PM, like the richest prime minister we've ever had, still using austerity. In fact, the cuts are going to hit probably people of colour the worst. What matters really is policies, and what matters is if you have decent economic policies. I mean, which is why most of the left got behind an old white guy in Jeremy Corbyn in 2017, because ultimately what matters is your political views and policies, whereas liberals completely ignore class analysis, push this kind of liberal identity politics, which again, I think it's well-meaning. And now we've seen the sort of inverse of that from the right wing, which is pushing their own culture and their own identity politics. I'm just completely sick of it.
I think probably what we're going to see with artificial intelligence, I know everyone hates it when I talk about artificial intelligence, but I think what we're going to see very soon with cameras everywhere and artificial intelligence is all ads are going to include ourselves. So you're going to open your phone and you're going to be scrolling, and it's going to be you wearing the clothes, looking really good. That's just a prediction from me. And then it will be really unrepresentative because you'll just see your own demographic. President Javier Milei's radical reform agenda has achieved a massive victory in Argentina's midterm elections. Milei's party, La Libertad Avanza, or the Liberty Advances, won over 40% of the vote compared to 31% for the centre-left Peronist opposition. The result bucked polling trends, which had Milei and the opposition pretty much neck and neck. Milei's brand of libertarian populism has inspired many on the right around the world, and he became famous for wielding a chainsaw to show his plans to cut state spending, or to represent his plans to cut state spending. And confounding his critics, dramatic cuts to the state seem to have come with some initial success. So Milei's cuts pushed the budget into a surplus for the first time in 15 years, and inflation came down dramatically. So the country's annualized inflation rate has gone from 210%, so that's enormous, 210%, when Milei was elected in December 2023, to 31% this September. Obviously, that's still very high, but a lot lower than 203%. Perhaps more surprisingly, poverty is also down. This is not what I was expecting. So Milei's cuts to public sector wages, subsidies and benefits initially saw poverty rates jump from 40 to 50%. But as inflation fell, so did poverty, which now sits at just over 30%, the lowest it's been since 2018. And after his victory on Sunday, Milei promised there would be no return to the past.
Argentines showed that they do not want to return to the failed model, the model of inflation, the model of monetary issuance, the model of a useless state, the model of insecurity.
Milei's victory, however, was helped along by a powerful ally. 6 weeks before these elections, Milei lost a regional election in Buenos Aires, which gave international markets the jitters. Investors sold off the Argentine peso, and Argentina's central bank found itself in a currency crisis. That was until Donald Trump jumped to the rescue with a $20 billion loan. And in a meeting with Milei, Trump said that the continuation of that credit would be dependent on who won in Argentina's elections.
It's a very big election being watched by the world because he's done an incredible job, but with that comes some pain, and they have some pain, and now they're coming out of it. I think the victory is very important. Your poll numbers, I hear, are pretty good, but I think they'll be better after this. And, you know, our approvals are somewhat subject to who wins the election, because if a socialist, or in the case of New York City, a communist wins, you feel a lot differently about making an investment. I think, Scott, you'd feel that if somebody that had no chance, in other words, if somebody wins and has no chance of ever having a great economy because of that philosophy, you would put a halt to what we're doing.
So Donald Trump was saying that the elections we saw on Sunday, that would determine whether the credit keeps coming. And of course, the elections went well for his ally. So Donald Trump today seemed happy. He said congratulations to President Javier Milei on his landslide victory in Argentina. He is doing a wonderful job. Our confidence in him was justified by the people of Argentina. Along with Trump, currency traders were also happy. So the announcement of Sunday's election results saw the value of the peso immediately jump by 10%. So has Javier Milei's brand of right-wing libertarianism been vindicated? Well, I spoke earlier to a critic of his agenda. Ernesto Seman is Associate Professor of Latin American History at the University of Bergen. Last year, he wrote a long read for the New York Review of Books called Argentina into the Abyss. And I started by asking him how big a win these elections were for Javier Milei.
It's a huge win. It's a huge win. He got 40% of the votes, 9%, and more important than the 40% itself, a 9% difference ahead of the Peronist coalition. And remarkably, his party won in the Buenos Aires province, which includes these 10 million people industrial belt that is historically perceived as the place, the social base of Peronism. Then during the last decades, there has not been consistently that, but it's still perceived as such. And where Peronism won the local elections 6 weeks ago. 6 weeks ago, Peronism won there for a 13-point difference. And yesterday, it lost for 1 point. Big part of the national results are explained in this change. But Milei also won in the largest districts in the country, including Buenos Aires City, Santa Fe, Córdoba, Mendoza. Still early to tell, but it seemed that he did well among the poor, the middle class, and of course the wealthy. So it's huge in that sense. It's also huge in institutional terms, because now for the first time he has a party. On a more solid foot in Congress, with gains in the Senate and in the lower house that will help him move forward with this libertarian radical agenda that had crashed against Congress several times during the last 2 years. He might have a much easier way now for his reforms. And it's also huge, in political terms, as an endorsement of this radical form of libertarian program. Whether the 40% of people that supported him are actually libertarians or are actually ideologically convinced of this, it's something that we can discuss. But it does feel for him a new period for a much more radical push towards his social reform and his macroeconomic policies. Keeping the dollar cheap, the peso strong, avoiding inflation with reduction of fiscal deficit, laying off public employees, and dismantling labor regulations in the private sector. All that is something that we're going to see much more clear than in the previous 2 years in the coming weeks or months. At least what he's going to try. That is going to be his reading of what has happened, right?
And I suppose let's talk about his economics, because I'm not an economic libertarian. Not many of our viewers are economic libertarians. But when you look at Milei, it does seem to have gone quite well over the past 2 years. So when he entered into the presidency, inflation was at 211%, which is incredibly high. It's now down to 30%, so still high, but that's a huge fall, and that is quite low for Argentina. More strikingly, so this is what I suppose surprised me, is that poverty is down. So it rose initially, but now it has fallen to its lowest level since 2018. So inflation down, poverty down. Is this a success?
Yeah. And to add to that, inflation was high, particularly during the last 2 years of the previous administration under President Alberto Fernandez. As you said, to more than 200%. So that's quite high. Of course, 30% now, remaining 30%. Not only still a lot, but in macroeconomic terms, it's a huge problem. That means for anybody who is working on the Argentine economy, means that the inflation problem has not been solved. It's called residual inflation, and it looks like it's something they're waiting for showing up again in the economy. But an immediate consequence of bringing down inflation from 200% to 20-something or 30% is an automatic reduction of poverty. You're going to see that pretty much anywhere, even if you push the income power of salaries down. Reduction of inflation is going to at least find an immediate balance in reduction of poverty. That brings the economy back to, you said 2018, probably 2017. That is before COVID. And the last years in which the administrations of the Kirchner first, Nestor Kirchner, and then Cristina Kirchner brought the economy to some sort of a stable cycle of more than a decade of economic growth, redistribution of wealth, relatively high employment, and expansion of social programs that had brought poverty down, controlled inflation. That lasted until 2015, when the first right-wing government won under President Mauricio Macri, very wealthy businessman that in some ways that we can see that now from a historical perspective sort of preceded and announced the radicalization of the right that is going to materialize with Milei. So yeah, the economy under those terms is performing better than what many people expected. That was going right into a crisis a few weeks before the election, and it was saved by Donald Trump. There's a lot of political and domestic conversation that we can have about the limitations of Kirchnerismo and Peronism as a political option for voters that I think are fundamental. But I think that from an international perspective, Donald Trump no doubt saved the libertarian experiment with the help, of between, it's not clear yet, but between $20 to $40 billion in form of a swap line. It stopped around peso and kept the dollar. I think everything would move towards the dollar was threatening. We triggered an inflation again 6 weeks before the election. Remember, Argentina is the country with the most dollars per capita worldwide. I mean, after the US, of course, right? Since the 80s or 90s, a government with a cheap dollar is a winning government, no exception. And this was the case again. So in as strong as it is, what you just said in terms of the economic performance of these two variables is so volatile that it was right there about to fail and saved by Donald Trump.
I mean, I suppose it's undeniable that Trump helped. I suppose to defend the bailout, and I suppose let's be clear, this is a generally very left-wing channel. You're a left-wing political economist, but I kind of want to test the idea that it seems like Milei's re-election might be a good news story for Argentina. And let me put the case to you. I'm kind of playing devil's advocate here, but it seemed to be the case that his economic policies were generally working. So inflation was going down, poverty was going down. The reason that international markets started selling off the peso was because there was this regional election in the Buenos Aires region when he lost to the Peronists, and that freaked out the markets because they thought that this economic program was about to come to an end. Donald Trump said essentially, look, we'll tide you guys over until the election. They did that. The elections have happened. There is now a big mandate for Milei to continue his what seems like a fairly successful experiment, and they'll no longer have to support the peso because the international markets are confident again, and the value of it has dramatically risen. So I suppose what's wrong with that narrative?
Yeah, right. Well, several things. One of the problems is to what extent a cheap dollar is sustainable only or mostly by receiving periodical, swap lines from the U.S. That's not something that is sustainable in under any kind of economic doctrine, right? The idea that the government put forward is that this is going to give the government and the country time to develop its own resources, and the objectives and the goals are in the commodities in general, and the energy sector in particular, mining, oil. The largest oil field in Argentina, is now being developed. So the idea is that the country will be able at some point. This idea is not new; it has happened before and it has failed before. That these sectors are going to provide the revenues to keep the dollar cheap and the economy stable. So one point is that it's not sustainable unless you think that you can get $20 billion literally during 2025 every 2 or 3 months, which is quite an experiment. But then the other part is to what extent this is socially and politically viable, because of course when you are comparing poverty numbers with 2023, as we said, after a couple of years of inflation and after COVID, of course numbers went down, and that is a good news. But there are still the numbers of 2018 that were not good numbers, and there's still the prospect of a libertarian agenda in which markets are going to regulate employment, salaries. It's hard to believe the sector that is not particularly characterized for creating jobs like the energy sector, mining sector, or even the agricultural sector, particularly soy, is going to create a sustainable domestic economy for a country of 50 million people. It's not a small country. So there's a bottleneck there. It's not that different from the bottleneck that the country faced in the 1990s. That to some extent was compensated by selling off during the privatization period of the 90s that was common in the rest of Latin America as well. Most of the state-owned companies, you can't sell them again. So it looks that the social base upon which the libertarian experiment is based is not sustainable with these policies if you don't create some sustainable, realistic, genuine ways to present an alternative to the libertarian agenda. So to the extent that the opposition disagree around the figure of former President Cristina Fernandez de Kirchner, that is not perceived as a realistic option against Milei. He might keep winning elections one after another, but I don't think those things last forever. And most likely, peronism is going to go in the coming weeks and months through a crisis and a conversation and a process of renovation of its figures, but also its political and economic agenda, right? A clear-cut commitment to keep inflation under control. That's something that is going to be crucial if you want to fight against the libertarians, but also a progressive program of expanding employment and improving income without repeating the same ideas that had sort of a limited impact under Kirchnerismo in the previous decade.
A British commentator who is critical of Israel has been detained by US immigration after far-right figures campaigned to have him deported. Sami Hamdi, who is the founder of a political risk consultancy called the International Interest, was in the middle of a speaking tour when ICE agents took him into custody. Hamdi is a vocal opponent of Israel's genocide and has expressed skepticism over Trump's ceasefire deal for Gaza. And this is what he told Sky News shortly after that deal was announced.
I think that it's now about how does Israel ensure either a situation where it can return to the war and continue what it's trying to achieve, the full annexation of Gaza and possible annexation of the West Bank by pushing the Palestinians out into Egypt. How does it do that without offending Donald Trump, who's absolutely insistent on this ceasefire deal?
Now, it turns out Sami Hamdi was right to be skeptical about the ceasefire. Israel has repeatedly breached the ceasefire since he spoke then, killing over 100 Palestinians and injuring hundreds of others. Just today, a reported Israeli drone attack killed 2 people and critically injured another in Gaza's Khan Yunis. This was the aftermath. The decision to detain Hamdi came after a platform called the Rare Foundation posted an article accusing him of praising terrorism and calling for his deportation. The Rare Foundation has been described as a hate group by the Southern Poverty Law Centre. This is how the outlet announced the news of Hamdi's arrest.
Sami Hamdi, the foreign jihadi agitator our investigations exposed, has been taken into custody and is being removed from the United States. We are proud to announce that this is one less hostile actor operating on U.S. soil.
Now, am I getting paranoid, or was that also AI? Anyway, the platform's founder, Amy Meck, I suppose it was presumably that woman who looked a little bit like a sort of AI-generated person, appeared to suggest on X that the commentator's arrest was the result of a tag team effort with Laura Loomer, another far-right activist who reportedly has a direct line to Trump. Loomer has made numerous posts recently describing Hamdi as a jihadi and a supporter of Hamas and the Muslim Brotherhood. She also posted this. So you can see here, Amazon is now selling Islamic foot washing stations. I don't think people realize how invaded we truly are by these people. So this is a very Islamophobic far-right person, with Donald Trump's ear, of course. Now, before he was detained, Hamdi spoke at a gala for the Council on American Islamic Relations, a civil rights group. They said this in a statement. Everyone should recognize that arresting a British citizen legally visiting the United States because he dared to criticize a foreign nation's genocide is our government's latest blatant affront to free speech. Our nation must stop abducting critics of the Israeli government at the behest of unhinged Israel-first bigots. This is an Israel-first policy, not an America-first policy, and it must end. Hamdi will remain in detention for a while before being deported. That's according to the activist Sean King. He said on X that Hamdi was told he won't see a judge for almost 2 weeks, and said his detention was based on lies from Laura Loomer. Hamdi's father, Dr. Mohammed El-Shami Hamdi, also disputed the claims against him. He said this, I affirm unequivocally that he has no affiliation with the Muslim Brotherhood or any political or religious group. His stance on Palestine is not aligned with any faction there, but rather with the people's right to security, peace, freedom, and dignity. He is quite simply one of the young dreamers of this generation, yearning for a world with more compassion, justice, and solidarity. One of the things that upset the right in the US is a video they've been sharing of Hamdi talking about the October the 7th attacks.
Netanyahu did not envisage that for the first time since 1948, the Palestinians would actually retake land back from the Israelis. Netanyahu did not envisage that for the first time since 1948, the Palestinians would be able to hold those territories for more than 72 hours.
We are pitying a people who brought a huge victory since 1948. Don't pity them. They don't want your pity. Celebrate the victory. Allah has shown the world that no normalization can erase the Palestinian cause. When everybody thought it was finished, it's roaring. How many of you feel it in your hearts when you got the news that it happened? How many of you felt the euphoria? Allahu Akbar. How many of you felt it?
I mean, I personally don't agree with speaking in that way about October the 7th. I mean, we've spoken about this many times on the show. I think the Palestinian people have a right to armed resistance. I don't think anyone has a right to kill civilians, which I think clearly happened on October the 7th. So to the extent that that was making a different claim, I disagree with that. And I imagine we'll see lots of people say, well, this is completely legitimate that he's been detained by ICE because he said X, Y, Z. I think there's a problem with that though, right? One, this is a guy who has a big following, articulate man, appears on Sky News, someone with a lot to say. And what he said there isn't more extreme than lots of people who have a massive following and who are very close to Donald Trump, who have massive power on the United States. So, for example, Senator Lindsey Graham suggesting Israel has the right to nuke Gaza.
Can I say this? Why is it okay for America to drop 2 nuclear bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki to end their existential threat war? Why was it okay for us to do that? I thought it was okay. To Israel, do whatever you have to do to survive as a Jewish state.
So that's fine. That's completely fine. Now, if you say something about October the 7th, which is different from the mainstream narrative in the United States, you get sort of brought up by ICE. But if you say you want to kill 2 million civilians with a nuclear bomb, that's fine. One might also ask if it's more extreme than Israeli Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich, who visited the US this month, saying that starving Gaza's entire population to death might be moral. Curtis, what do you make of this story?
Well, first of all, the free speech warriors are back, right? The political right have obsessed about free speech and said that the left always want to cancel them. And this is what happens when they put their policies into practice. This is what real cancellation is, by the way. If you get cancelled and you get your own podcast and your own TV show to moan about it, that's not being cancelled. But being detained by the US government, that really is. I mean, look, I share your sentiment on what he said about October 7th. Of course, none of us are going to say it was a good thing. It was, we should be celebrating innocent people being killed on the 7th of October. But to deconstruct that compared to obviously what some of the Israeli politicians are saying, right, is that the Palestinians deserve armed resistance. That is true. And again, even though we don't support innocent people being killed on the 7th of October, the amount of people killed on that day is nowhere near the size of what the IDF have done in the last 2 years. In fact, what people don't like to talk about, especially on the mainstream media, is that Israel killed their own on the 7th of October through the Hannibal Directive. So with that context, of course, trying to detain this person and the fact that they might be there for 2 weeks, right, is absolutely wild. But of course, this isn't about deterring terrorism or anything like that. It's because of the political views of those who do not support Israel. Because at the end of the day, the Israel lobby, especially with America, are so intertwined that you can't be doing this. Because people like Smotrich, people like Benjamin Netanyahu and many others can say openly genocidal stuff, can say we want to flatten Gaza, can say that all Gazans, despite the fact that 50% of them are children, right, are animals. They can say we want to destroy everyone and everything in its wake. That's absolutely fine. But if the shoe's on the other foot, you can't. Now, I mean, to look at ICE more widely, first of all, ICE is obviously about immigration, and Donald Trump's immigration policies have been extremely right-wing. But this isn't even a thing about immigration because he's not an immigrant, right? He's a British citizen who's literally going abroad, visiting America to do speeches, right? So it's not about immigration. But we've got ICE agents who are basically the modern day Gestapo going around states, and they're now getting to the point where they're arresting police officers, right? Now, that is a severely, severely flawed political calculation from Donald Trump. Now, don't get me wrong, a lot of people who are in the American police force, American cops, voted for Trump. Probably a lot of fascists are in there too. But one thing they don't like is when other people come in and sort of tell them what to do. They do look after their own. So this is a really bad political calculation for Donald Trump when ICE agents are going after police officers. But look, we've got now this sort of new wave of far-right fascist sort of narratives, which is, if we disagree with you, we want to deport you, right? They're saying it about Zohran Mamdani. They're saying we want to, this is prominent US politicians saying that they want to denaturalize and then deport Mamdani. Why? Because he's pro-Palestine. Is that why? Is it because he wants to freeze the rent? It is. It's because he's anti-Israel. He's a socialist. I mean, even Donald Trump has been saying that. He's been saying, well, what's going to happen when a communist wins New York mayoralty? This is the political landscape we're in. Also, I found it very funny what Laura Loomer was saying about the Islamic foot washing stations. Once again, right? I mean, the right wing trying to push this conspiracy theory that there's, the West is being Islamified through invasion. Once again, it's Amazon, biggest economy in the world. It's simply because demographic change and they want to make more money. That's simply it. Which ironically, look, like obviously those of us who are normal, we don't care if you're a Muslim, we don't care what religion you are. If you're a decent person, that's all that matters. But for the right wing who don't want to see the Islamification of the West, crazy stuff anyway, then why do they support the capitalist system, which does rely on high amounts of immigration? It's very contradictory stuff there. But yeah, this is an extremely fascist government. I know that you get the right wing being really offended when you say the fascist word. And I do think some people on the left can be just a little bit overzealous when they use that word. But when it comes to the US, it is absolutely quintessentially fascist. You could not disagree with it. And their immigration policy shows that to be the case. We have ICE agents going after people who we don't even know if they're legal or illegal. They're just seeing a person of color and arresting them. We're seeing them beat up people. I mean, they shot a pastor, for God's sakes. They're disappearing and blackbagging people on the streets. People have died in their detention. And this is the end result of Trump's America and their far-right immigration policy, especially if you contradict Western foreign policy.
We could have another fascism debate. We've had a few on this channel, but we're going to wrap up there because it is 3 minutes past 7. Curtis, thank you so much for joining me this evening.
Thank you so much, Michael. It's always a pleasure hosting with you.
Always a pleasure to have you on. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. We'll be back tomorrow at 6 p.m. For now, you've been watching Novara Media. Good night.